Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to PLF's Forum on Education in the Time of COVID. This is the second of a three-part series where we are exploring issues affecting Latinos in the greater New Haven area and how COVID-19 is impacting these. My name is Ijeh, and I'll be today's moderator. PLF was founded in 2003 by a group of friends organized by John and Francis Padilla. Together, they made the first contribution in what is now a permanent endowment that is used for grant making, policy forums, and leadership building. To date, PLF has raised over $400,000. The funds are used to host forums like this and community events that serve as a vehicle to engage Latinos and non-Latinos about issues impacting us all, in addition to scholarships and a small grade to the community. There are a few house for this afternoon. Our streaming Facebook Lives will have access there. All of the participants are currently muted, so you will only see and hear from the panelists and myself. If you're having technical difficulties, contact us in the chat. Staff from the foundation will be monitoring the chat to provide assistance as needed. If you would like to submit questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A feature. We'll be taking a look at the questions to ask after the panelists have had an opportunity to speak. Now let me introduce this afternoon's panelists. Dr. Miguel A. Cardona was appointed Commissioner of Education by Governor Ned Lamont in August 2019 after 2 decades of working in the Meriden Public Schools as an elementary school teacher, a school principal, and administrator. He serves as the co-chairperson of the Connecticut Legislative Achievement Gap Task Force and the Connecticut Birth to Grade 3 Leaders Council. He is a lifelong Meriden resident where he lives with his wife Marisa and 2 children. Yesenia Rivera was nominated to the New Haven Board of Education in 2019 and elected its chair in 2020. Rivera is the program director at Edgewood PTA Child Care and the director of Housing Assessment and Integration at the Connections Supportive Housing for Families program. She attended Troop Middle School and is a graduate of Hill Regional Career High School and Albertus Magnus College. She's a proud wife and mother with 3 daughters who all attended New Haven Public Schools. It seems like the perfect time to have this conversation around education, as we've seen that a number of districts across the state have made decisions about whether to host children in person or virtual or some hybrid format. We've also seen since the start of this academic school year that there's been shifts in the plans that were developed. I know for me as a parent with a child in the New Haven public school system, one of the concerns I've had is how do we in the time of COVID begin to balance both our work life and school life, some of us all at home, some of us with multiple children. And I often think in the greater New Haven area, particularly about families who have a lack of access to, be it good internet or the technology necessary to make virtual schooling an option. I also think about the multitude of services that our families receive and students receive while in school, that when buildings are closed, those are services that they don't have access to. So I know I'm really, really interested to hear from Dr. Cardona and from Yesenia to get a better understanding of, from the state perspective, what's happening, and at a local perspective here in New Haven, what we're doing as well. We're excited to hear from you. And as questions come up to our participants, please feel free to send those in through the Q&A section. And so now I'll turn it over to Dr. Miguel Cardona.
Thank you very much, Yari, and pleasure to be here with you. Just the title alone makes me excited. Progreso Latino, right? We're all interested in el Progreso Latino. Glad to be here with Yesenia also. I've had the pleasure of working with Yesenia over the last couple of months, having conversations with her and engaging with her, and I look forward to a good conversation, to answering questions. You brought up the question about, how do we do this? How do we educate children in a time of COVID? I have to tell you, throughout Connecticut, I've been extremely proud of the hard work of our educators, of our families, our parents, the sacrifices that have had to be made, especially in the spring when it happened overnight, really. I mean, in some districts, they had resources and they had technology where they were able to literally flip a switch and have everybody learn remotely. And in other districts, we know that no one prepares for a pandemic, but we know that some districts, 3-4 weeks into the pandemic, they were still trying to figure out how to get materials to students because they didn't have access. So what we learned in the spring was that the difference of experience for students in Connecticut varied greatly based on, number one, what resources they had, what resources the district had, and what access to technology they had. So we knew right away we needed to double down on our efforts to make sure we're providing technology and infrastructure so that kids can log on. And we work really hard with philanthropy. I want to give a quick shout out to the Dalio Foundation, who stepped up with 60,000 laptops early on. The governor and the governor's team, where they donated or they bought another 80,000 laptops to distribute. But also the infrastructure. We sent out more than 19,000 hotspots so that people can have access to the internet, because the device is only as good as the connectivity, right? And we also worked at the agency to develop a robust online system, the Learning Hub, where they can have access to materials in English and in Spanish, and important materials on social emotional development for children and families. So, a lot of work went into doing that. Obviously, we're not done. We're always going to continue to improve. We're never going to be done. But thanks to the hard work of the families and the educators and everybody kind of came together to help support our learners. I'm proud to say that in Connecticut, 52% of our districts are reporting that they're predominantly full in person, which means that students are in front of their teachers, they're with their friends, they're having conversations. It's not normal, and by no stretch of the imagination is it what it was before March 12th, but there is engagement with students to students, which we know is really important to them. About 170,000 students in Connecticut have chosen to learn from home, whose families have chosen for them to learn from home. So we're making sure that we're trying to support districts to develop good quality curriculum that could be delivered online. So that we know that that's taking place. And about 370,000 students have entered their schoolhouses. So that's something that we're really proud of. I think the percentages are higher than in other states around us. And I'm really proud of the fact that due to the hard work of our districts and the mitigation strategies, schools are places where while we're hearing about cases that come into our schools, there has been very little communication to our agency or Department of Public Health that being in the school is why the person contracted COVID-19. In fact, what we're hearing is the opposite, that events outside of the school is where students and staff members are contracting. So keep up the good mitigation strategies. It's critically important for our schools to stay open, that we continue that in our schools. But equally as important, that outside of school, that the communities don't get that fatigue that causes people to lower their guard. And unfortunately, that's what's leading to the increase in cases. Our schools will be remaining open if we can control the spread in our community. So together, I'm committed with all of you on the call to make sure that that happens so that our students can benefit from the best possible education in Connecticut. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miguel Cardona. Yari, Ijeh, I know that similar to many families in New Haven, the technology is not always up to par with what we need, including internet access. So thank you, Yari, for being our moderator at this time of I'm having network issues as well. So back to you, Yari.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cardona, for that overview. I think it feels very hopeful, right? I often say that I know my story, but I don't know the whole story, right? And I know my little guy is at home in front of a computer, and so to think that we've got 52% of students in person, and that the transmission is not happening in schools, I think is quite promising for what's to come. I sort of heard a little bit of a call to action in your opening remarks to say, don't get fatigued, right? We've been in this for quite a few months now, but the importance of maintaining distance, wearing masks, and doing what we can to reduce transmission remains critical to not only all of us, but to students continuing to have the ability to go into a schoolhouse, as you mentioned, and being able to learn and receive the education that you all are preparing for them. So thank you, thank you. I want to turn it over now to Yesenia to give us a bit of a glimpse of, at the local level in New Haven, what's happening here.
Hi, Yari. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited and honored to be sharing this platform with Dr. Cardona. I'm going to approach this a little bit differently and introduce myself a little bit because I know that I'm pretty much a newbie. People don't really know me, and so I figured I'd introduce myself and then respond to questions that families or parents may have. So hopefully that's okay. So my name is, as you said, Jesenia Rivera. I'm a Latina, specifically Puerto Rican. I'm pretty much a lifelong New Haven resident. I've lived here since I was 13 years old. You know, like many Puerto Rican families, my story is not much different. You know, we went back and forth to Puerto Rico. We lived here a few years, lived there a few years. So I feel that brings a different perspective into how I do things. I'm a mom to 3 beautiful girls, Miguel, Ijeh, and Janitza. They're all adults now, but they're still my babies. And I'm also the wife to a wonderful husband, Elmer. Professionally, I'm the program director at Edgewood PTA Childcare, and also the housing director at a supportive housing for families program, which works with DCF involved families, helping them to secure housing, education, and employment. So pretty much my life missions has been children and their families. I was asked to serve as a board member for the New Haven Public Schools Board of Education, and I answered the call. I can't even say reluctantly because I had no idea what I was getting into. I became a board member in March of 2019. I was then asked to run for president of that board, and I became board president in January of 2020. Aside from being a mom, I can say that this has been by far one of my greatest challenges. Being on this board has not been an easy thing, especially now with dealing with everything COVID related. If you had asked me even just 2 years ago if I'd be doing this, the answer would have been there, no way. But then I can say that then I had no idea I'd care this much about our kids and our families. You know, as program director of a before and after school program, and as a mom, I've always cared about our kids, our New Haven kids. But once on the board, it was different because I realized very soon after joining the board that Latino children are seriously underrepresented in our school system. And that's not to say that I don't care about all of our children, because I do, but you know, for me specifically, I realized we need to do more for our Latino kids. So at least for me, I'm thinking no one would ever do this to themselves. They didn't care about the kids and their families. So I just want to say, you have a voice in me. To the families and parents that are out there, you have a voice in me, the only Latina on the Board of Education. But I also have to ask you, how are you, the community, going to work with me? As a Latino community, we have to be engaged. You know, for me, it's so sad to be at those board meetings. Now we're doing them virtually. And I don't hear from many Latino families. When the meetings were in person, I'd look out into the crowd. I didn't see many Latino families. So I would say, you know, make sure that you're getting engaged, make your voices heard, because this is the only way we're going to be able to further the agenda for our students and our kids. Ask your teachers any questions or concerns. They're there to help, and they want to help. They want to make sure that this remote and hybrid experience is successful for your child. Ask for translators if you need it. This is your right. Show up for your child in this way. Access whatever you can. Don't be intimidated because you don't speak the language or you don't feel like you have enough education. Your advocacy will matter in how far your child gets in education and ultimately in life. And as Latinos, I get it. I understand. We sometimes feel that we don't have that right. We feel intimidated, but you do have the right. So please find the ways to get involved in these conversations for the betterment of your child. Thank you.
Thank you, Yesenia. And thank you to our viewers. I see that we've got a few questions coming up. And so Yesenia, you're absolutely right. You know, it almost feels like we finally have representation, and we have to show up with you as Latino parents of students in the New Haven Board of Ed to represent what our needs and our interests are. So those are reflected in the programming that's available to students in New Haven. So there's a few questions along those lines, and that is, you know, do the meetings align with the work schedules of our Latino parents in an effort to sort of make it easier for us to be there?
So for meetings for the Board of Education, I can say, I'm sure it doesn't align with everyone's schedule, but our meetings are at 5:30 p.m. I can't say when they end because we just never know. Last night was not that bad though. We ended at 8:30. So, but even if you come on and just listen for a while, if you have anything to say publicly, you know, you don't have to memorize all this stuff. You can write a statement, read it, ask someone, it can be translated. And then in terms of the parent meetings, I know that the staff is working really hard to make sure they're getting those parents meetings done after 4 or 5 p.m. I believe they're doing those now on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but there is information that goes on to the parents when those meetings are happening. And that information goes out in Spanish and English.
Great, thank you. So Dr. Cardona, we had another question come in through the chat, and there's interest in knowing what's the number of students that haven't attended or have not been able to access resources, and this is for students that are both attending remotely and in person.
Thank you for that question. I want to just piggyback on Jesenia's comment, if I could first. Thank you, Jesenia, for, I don't know if people know this, but board members are volunteers, right? You're volunteering. So you're not getting paid. You're not getting $1 for this. You're giving up your 3 beautiful daughters and your husband are giving up time with you 2 times a month for 3, 4, 5 hours. Sometimes I attended the last meeting. I listened in. Not to mention the conversation that you're having in between, all for the betterment of our children in New Haven, right? All so that the public education system in New Haven could be high quality. So I just want to commend you for that and reiterate that, como se dice en español, en la unión está la fuerza, ¿verdad? Like Yesenia is representing us, but we also have to make sure that we're part of that process. I know los Latinos siempre always have had, I know in Puerto Rico, where my family's from as well, yo nací aquí, pero my family came from Puerto Rico, la política is really important, right? And engagement, civic engagement is critically important. And I think it's more important here in many ways because we want to make sure that our students have, our Latino students have access to high quality learning and high quality opportunities, so that we can continue to see their growth and the limitless potential that they come into our schools with. We want to make sure we take advantage of that and open doors for them. So thank you, Jesenia, for holding it down over there and the hard work you're doing along with your other board members. You know, to the question of disengagement or students disconnected, we're going to be, typically this information, I just want to provide some context. Typically this information is gathered at the end of the school year. Student engagement and you know, broken down by race, ethnicity, by free or reduced lunch status. All this information is really good information for us to have at the state level. And historically, our systems were set up to do that at the end of the year. Long, big process to get all this data in. And we knew that this year it was totally different. We needed to come up with a system now. We couldn't wait. So just this morning, I had a first draft review of some of the data that we're going to be putting out probably this week or early next week, that has that information now. And what you're gonna hear is that there are roughly around ballpark of 15,000 students. The data hasn't been cleaned up yet, so the number could change, that either have not registered or have chosen to go to either homeschool or private schools. Now, that's a very alarming number. About half of that, what we're finding is half of that is the lower pre-K and kindergarten. So parents have selected to wait a year before sending their students back. And what we're trying to do is look at every grade level where it's happening, which districts are finding that less students are enrolled now than they were in June. So these are things that we're doing the analysis now. The data entry for the districts closed like, I think it was like last Thursday. So now we're really just putting it through our systems to make sure that we can make sense of the data so we can make it public. But I will share that of the 160, back when these data were collected, 169,000 students whose families chose to have the students learn from home, 97% of these students have logged on and have been connected. So 97% of 169,000 students have logged on this year, which is a huge improvement from the spring when we know thousands of students didn't have a device or even connectivity. With that said, 3% haven't. And that number, when you think of 3%, you don't think it's a lot, but that's about 5,000 students. So we have to know what's happening with these 5,000 students, whether they moved out of state, or they're disconnected, or if there's something else. And this is the work that we're engaging with districts to try to find out what is the story. Every child has a story. What is the story? We're pleased that 97% have been connected. For those 3%, you know, that remains our work to work with districts to find out whether it's a home visit or communicating because maybe phone numbers were changed and they moved. How do we track these students down? How do we communicate between districts in case they signed up somewhere else? So that's to answer that question. 97% of our remote students have logged on. And we're gonna have more detailed attendance data this upcoming month. Again, we're receiving reports from districts, reports that we developed this past month to make sure that we have data more regularly as opposed to once a year.
Excellent, thank you. So that's good, 97%. Another one of the questions that came in through the Q&A is specific to English language learning students. And this participant is noticing that engagement is of issue under current COVID conditions. What are we doing to engage that population of students? And how are we doing to make learning not only accessible, but appropriate, given?
Right. Is it a question for me or for Yesenia? I'd be happy to chime in.
I think I'd open it to both of you.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, English learners is a group of students that if we're not careful, the amount of loss in learning could be greater than most typical students that are already proficient in English. We have to recognize that just because you have a laptop and internet connection doesn't mean all things are equal. For many of our students, they're receiving instruction in English only when they're English language learners. The laws have not changed. It is the responsibility of districts to make sure that they're providing bilingual education services where it's appropriate, English learning services where it's appropriate, whether it's remote or in person, right? And we know that's easier said than done, but it's critically important that we don't lose focus of those students. And I would also argue students with developmental delays or high needs, special education students. We need to make sure we're doubling down on our efforts for these students and bringing them back as much as possible while respecting the choice of the families if they choose to keep them home. What we've done at the agency, COVID hit in March, and I knew with our L population, we needed to make sure we had somebody focused on that. We hired Dr. Gladys Lavas. You may know Dr. Lavas. She's a professor at Southern also. We call her La Madrina in Connecticut because she has over 30 years experience in bilingual education. She helped write the laws in the 70s. So she's someone that can be a real support to districts and help push to make sure that districts are meeting the needs of our English learners, not only Spanish speaking, but other languages as well. So she's engaged, she's now the Director of Equity and Language at the State Department of Education, and she's engaging English language directors and finding ways to make sure that our kids are not being encouraged to go remote if they're AELs, and make sure that the quality of programming that they receive is high quality. So I'll pause there because I know Jesenia probably wants to add to that as well.
I can unmute myself. Sure. So I asked what we were doing, and we've been paying attention to the L students and also the special education students. And some of the things that we're doing is making sure first and foremost that all of the students have access to a device and that they have the needed materials, such as the Wi-Fi. There's also the daily tier instruction in collaboration with general education, bilingual, ESOL, and the special education teachers. Obviously the IEPs, ongoing tier 2 interventions to support those students with the highest needs in literacy intervention and Spanish literacy interventions. We've rolled out Imagine Learning Language and Literacy. I guess it was 1,700 licenses, and Espanol for 600 licenses across the district. This is a supplemental program that targets English language and special language development. Also professional development to all teachers across the district on key strategies for English learners and how to leverage tech tools to scaffold and support the English learners. And then also the similar professional development was conducted for the students with disabilities. So this was both for special ed and ELL students.
Thank you. I'm trying to monitor the chat here because we've got a little bit of traffic. Give me just one quick second. So there's a question here for students who are choosing to learn from home. How adequate is their learning process? What's the accessibility to certified teachers, and so on and so forth. So what's the quality of education, I think is what I'm hearing for students that are receiving online education. I think, from the parent perspective, I think I mentioned, I have a 4-year-old who got into the Barack Obama school in October. We were a late acceptance as a result of the magnet lottery. And I've been pretty impressed. He logs on once a day, and we do have him in a private preschool just because we have a need to sort of work, and having him home creates a challenge, which I'm sure a lot of other families are also faced with. But he's excited to get on his tablet and to see his teacher. And the reverse is actually true for us. We only speak Spanish at home. And so his only window to English and access is in school. And because he's been exposed and in an academic setting for some time now, he does speak English, but he finds great joy. I find that the materials that the teacher is using are very age appropriate. They are super engaging. I'm not at the point where I'm going to leave him in front of the tablet for an hour just yet, because who knows what toys he'll be, throwing at the tablet or anything else. He's a toddler. But I do have to say that it's something that he looks forward to. It has become a part of his day, and has created some routine and structure for us that makes it a little bit easier to sort of manage a household with 2 kids. I also have an 8-month-old baby crawling around. So I have to say that I have been very impressed on the parent side. So I don't know if from behind the screen you could tell us a little bit more about, what new tools, right, are educators accessing in order to be able to engage students through learning virtually.
I went first last, so I'm going to defer to my colleague over here, Jesenia. She wants to talk a little bit about New Haven, then I'll talk more generally.
So I know that for New Haven preschool through 3rd grade, they'll be eligible for attending school 4 days a week. And that's either staying at home, or when we start on November 9th, they can come into the school. And so they're receiving instruction 4 days a week. I think Wednesday will be the only day that they're not receiving instruction, because those days will be taken for teachers to be able to plan for the week. And then when they're in school, for the deep cleaning of the schools. So they'll have live instruction from a teacher virtually 4 days a week. That's what the plan is in New Haven, what we've been doing in New Haven.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And it was nice to hear, Yari, your story. Sometimes you hear the headlines and you read all the things that are happening. It's always nice to hear things that are working, right? And kudos to your son's teacher, and to you for making it work. Your question was, how do we know that it's quality, right? I'll tell you that, so again, March 12th, right? Everything went down, the schools closed. We recognize that, as I said before, there were some districts where every kid had a laptop, they had online curriculum already. It's almost like they never skipped a beat. In other places, sadly, there were links to different Google pages, or, just generic work, like busy work. And not because people weren't trying, but because they didn't have the preparation. I'm telling the parents on the line, expect a lot more now. We should be doing it way better. Do not accept anything less than what you think your children need to be successful. As Yesenia mentioned before, continue to advocate to make sure that the quality of learning matters. I think sometimes we feel, okay, we got a device, we got connectivity, they're fine. Make sure that what they're seeing on the other side of the computer screen is high quality content, because we have to have high expectations for our learners and our students. I shared on our chat box here a link to the State Department of Education's addendum and plan resources. If you ever have a hard time sleeping, just go through it and start reading it, you'll fall right asleep. But there's months worth of work developing standards for how to close schools, how to open schools, how to feed kids, special education students, English learners, music. But I want to bring particular attention to Addendum 11. You don't have to look at it now, but Addendum 12. It's called Reimagining Classrooms, Planning the Instructional Time for Remote Learning in Hybrid and Full Remote Models. We set out standards of expectations of what districts should be doing. And that includes synchronous learning. What that means is what we're doing right now, where we're looking at each other live. You could see me, I could see you. And then there's asynchronous learning, when a teacher assigns work that a person could do without being on the call, right? So we have standards set up, what constitutes a full day. If you're at home and you're getting work and it takes you 25 minutes to finish, that's not a school day. Don't accept that. So Addendum 12 is what you want to look at to get more specific answers to your question. And this was developed with input from educators and district leaders and school leaders to make sure that we're not lowering the bar in Connecticut for our students. You're muted, Yari. Sorry, you're muted.
Thank you. So we heard a lot about our need to advocate, about being engaged, and what we as both on the parent end and the educator end could do. And we've got a question coming from the audience that I just lost. Okay, so the question reads, my colleague and I work in the Hill community. We work for Clifford Beers as community health organizers. My colleague is Latina. What can we do to help? And before, so let's throw that question out there. And I don't know which of the two are in a better position to answer that.
I can give it a try. I would say we want to be, I want to be respectful of our teachers, right? So when you're talking about what can parents do to help, what can community organizers do to help, obviously getting involved with your board meetings, but ask your teachers, what do we need? What do we need to make sure that this is successful? What do we need to make sure that the kids are, how can we engage the parents in making sure that the kids are successful in their learning in this way? So I would think that it would be a conversation with your school staff, principals, teachers, but also with the parents, with the families.
Yeah, it's good feedback. You know, and thank you for the work you're doing at Clifford Beers. I know Clifford Beers has a contract with New Haven, and I recently looked at it just to help support some of the work. I think, you know, you're speaking to what we know works, right? That mentality, it still takes a village to raise a child. It's all of our responsibility, right? Teachers play an important, critical role. We know that there's no other role that can influence student success more than a teacher, right? So I like Jesenia's feedback. Be specific to what are the needs, you know, does it mean, you know, a kid could benefit from a mentor after hours or some recreation? Can you imagine if you're on the computer for 5 hours during the day and you can't really go out because either mom or dad is working? Could that kid benefit from a social group that's moderated by adults, by a safe group where they can do things, even if it's online, just to engage the students for their social emotional well-being? We know that kids are so resilient, but we also know that they're social. And if it's tough for us and we have fatigue, imagine how difficult it is for children who need to be social and need to be around each other. So continue to do that work. Talk to the schools, talk to the teachers about what specific things they need. Could it be that there's a virtual talent show? It doesn't have to be anything too deep. Could it be a virtual talent show where these beautiful kids are showing their talents, or their pet, you know, hour, where the kids show up with their pets and talk a little bit about their pets to their friends, that's set up by a community partner? You know, things like that, where children can be connected again. That's always critically important.
I think you talked about, or this makes me think about the older kids. And so what concerns do you have for that youth between the ages of 13 and 20? And what supports are we seeing necessary to either maintain engagement or to keep them busy, really?
Them engaged. You know, before I'm commissioner, before I'm an educator, I'm a father, right? I'm a father. I have a beautiful 14-year-old daughter, and my son just turned 16. And initially, I thought when COVID hit in the spring, that's a good age because they can handle it better. They can do remote learning. You know, they're a little bit more with it. They know what's going on. Whereas if I had a little kid, they wouldn't understand why the routines have changed. But as the summer went on, my thoughts changed, and I felt like it's a very difficult time to be a teenager because that social connection that you need is not there. Or, you know, I'm as they call me, a strict parent, where I'm not letting my kid go out and just hang out now. No, you can't. Masks are required, those type of things. So I realized the social emotional impact it had on these kids. So to answer your question, Yari, getting kids in school, even if it's in a hybrid version, to be around other kids is that's the best thing that from my personal experience, my kids' social emotional affect improved so much once they got back into some routine. It's not the same. Sports, a lot of controversy around sports. I get it. I wouldn't let my children do a sport if I felt it was too risky. But the sports that they do play were cleared and covered. That has been a lifesaver. But they're monitored, they have masks on, they're separated. So those activities that kids typically do is good for them. That personal touch, engagement, if they're fully remote and they're not able to do that, is somebody calling them and saying their name? Are they hearing their name from someone other than their parent? If the answer is no, then work on that. Get a mentor, get a counselor from the school, or some networking where they can engage with someone on a social level for the older kids, and where possible, connect them to activities. I have to say, I know Daniel Diaz over there in Ijeh, and he sent me some information recently of some of the programs that they did over there, and I just thought it was cool how kids could do things from their home and engage in a group. So they were making replicas of famous artwork, and kids were doing that in their house and they were sharing it. And then they got together to talk about that. That human connection is something that our teenagers really need. So it's important that we're trying to find creative ways to do that with the school, but also out in the community. In New Haven, one of the beautiful things about New Haven is that there's so many different community groups that come together. Take advantage of those. I would say that. Take advantage of those.
Thank you. There's been a few questions around language accessibility beyond just Spanish, and access to translators for both Arabic and other languages. What's your experience been with ensuring that parents or families that speak a language other than English or Spanish, that there are resources for the schools to communicate with them?
This might be more directed toward a local, because there's local boards of education are the ones that have contracts with language lines. I know language lines are very popular in communities that have multilingual families. If you don't have the benefit of having someone that speaks that language, you can access a language line where there's a translator on the other line, but I'll let Yesenia speak to that.
I know that here in New Haven, the district has been working hard to have other languages being translated for parents, and they do have access. I'm just not sure exactly what those are, so I would have to ask that question and get back to you with an answer. But I do know that it is happening. I'm just not sure on the specifics.
Okay. Well, it looks like we're up for time. And so I want to say thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cardona and Jesenia, for joining us this afternoon. I think that you shared a lot of information around what's happening. I certainly learned a little bit more, even as an active, engaged parent. In good old-fashioned PLF style, there's always a call to action with our audience. And I also want to thank our audience for remaining engaged and for asking some really great questions. There were a few we didn't get to, and we'll make sure that those are answered in the communication that we send following this afternoon's webinar. But I think some of the call to action that I heard loud is to be engaged, right? That we have to engage with the Board of Education. We have to show up and say presente, and that we have to do the work. We also have to advocate for quality work. I think that Dr. Cardona makes a really good point. If we don't know what our children are exposed to during virtual lessons, and we're not actively participating in that work, then we don't know what they're learning. And if whatever we're seeing is not up to par with what we believe is quality education, then again, let's go back to number one: be engaged, be present, and we have to talk about that. I think, the conversation is in the context of COVID, and we have to wear our masks, we have to wash our hands, and we have to maintain social distance. We can't get tired of that. It's not the time, it's not the place. We heard from Dr. Cardona, the social emotional development that kids are getting, even if it's just in front of a tablet, or those who are in person, right, is critically important. And we need to be able to, as a state, continue to provide access to education for our children in person, right? Where possible is best. We're going to read addendum 12. And I think that for our community partners, because we know that that's a big part of our audience, is that we all know that each and every one of us has a little bit that we can offer. Jesenia offers her time to be a part of the Board of Ed. And we've got the community that typically wraps around to sort of provide those services. And if you have questions, I think Dr. Cardona put it best. Ask the school what they need, right? Because they're in the best position to tell us. And I think that the last piece that to me resonates a lot is, who else is calling? My son's name is Naji. Who else is calling Naji other than Mama and Papa? Because I think it's important for kids to see that even in all of the restrictions that we're living in today, the world is not just about the three of us, that there's many other people out there that care and are worried about you and want to make sure that you're doing well. And so I want to say thank you again to Dr. Cardona, to Yesenia. The third of our series is going to be in November. And we look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next forum, the economic status of Latinx in November. Thank you all for.
Thank you.
Sigan pa'lante.
Adiós.